Okay, so good morning, everybody. Really pleased to introduce Lynda to you today. She's going to be giving us a webinar about life in the fast lane, how to best prepare for life post-placement. Just to remind everyone that it is a webinar, that we can't see you, we can't hear you, so don't worry about what's going on in your background. Feel free to use the chat function at the bottom and pop any questions you've got, and I'll address those to Lynda. They'll all be anonymised, so don't worry about feel free to ask whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay, so I'll hand over to Lynda, and I'll just bear with me 1 second. So I'll still be here, Lynda, but you won't be able to see me or hear me.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try shared screen here, so hopefully this will work if you just bear with me for a second. Oh. Okay. So good morning, everybody. If there are any problems with sound or anything as we go along, please let us know. So can I say a big thank you to Joe for the introduction this morning, and to Adoption UK for allowing me the opportunity to share with you this morning. I don't know what it's like with you, but it's a pretty gloomy, wet day where I am. So hopefully you're having better weather. So my name is Lynda Graham, and I work as a counsellor based in Carrickfergus, 11 miles north of Belfast. So from my window, I can see Belfast Lough. So if you've flown in or come into Belfast by ferry, you'll have probably passed my house. So let me just take a few minutes to share with you why I'm here today. I qualified as a social worker in 1986 and worked in child protection for several years before moving into the area of fostering and adoption. For the last 20 years, I've specialised in adoption work, initially recruiting, assessing and training prospective parents, and then placing children and supporting families during those difficult days and some not so difficult days. In 2005, I qualified as a counsellor and continued working in an adoption agency, supporting birth parents as well as adoptive families. And then I had a huge dream, I suppose, to become an independent practitioner. So 6 years ago, I took that brave step and resigned from my post. And I now work as a private counsellor and independent trainer. So I specialise in post-adoption support. I supervise other counsellors and provide training to prospective parents and new parents, as well as those who've been parents for quite some time, and also provide training to social workers and other staff. And just in the last few weeks, I have been appointed to one of the adoption panels in Northern Ireland. So I'm really looking forward to being part of that and to be on the other side of the panel, because in the past I have presented families to panel. So hopefully that will be a positive experience for me and for them. So what I've realised working as a counsellor is that allowing time and space out of our busy lives allows the opportunity to explore how we feel. And when I say we, I mean new parents or parents who've been parents for quite some time, to look at what's going on for you, to identify your own feelings. And even in those very early days of placement, counselling can have a role and can offer you the opportunity just to explore what's going on for you. So I also have a personal dimension to this whole area of adoption, post-adoption depression. And our son joined our family when he was almost 5 months old, and he's now 24. And as I said to Joe before we came on, he's a videographer and content creator, so hence the mic. And he's been very kind in setting me up today because I'm a bit of a technophobe. So I have that personal experience. My son is now 24, and have that personal experience of infertility assessment, meeting a child, becoming a parent, working through toddler years, school years, teenage years, and now 20s. So I have that personal experience to bring to the webinar today too. And I'm sure you realise that 25 years ago, things were very different. The assessment process was very different. There was no training offered, and introductions were just a few hours really. And in some ways it felt like I was kidnapping a child, because we turned up, we met him for a few hours, and then a few days later turned up and picked him up and brought him home. And thankfully he adapted very well. But looking back in those days, I can identify with some of the issues that I had and also that he had, and we'll look at a few of those later on. So 8 years ago, I had the opportunity to complete a master's in counselling, and when my supervisor asked me what I would like to do for research, I didn't have to think too long about it, because the area of post-adoption depression was very, very big in my mind, and something that I really felt passionate about. So that I then had an opportunity to not only study the literature, but also to interview mums who had been diagnosed with depression, not specifically post-adoption depression, and that was probably because their GPs hadn't heard of it. So those mums very kindly gave me the opportunity to have lengthy interviews with them and to explore their adoption journey and how they felt about dealing with the depression, how social workers reacted, how family members reacted, how their partners, if they had one, reacted, and gave me a real good insight into post-adoption depression from their viewpoint. During this webinar, I am going to obviously deal with some sensitive issues. So can I just say to you, if you do need to take a break at any stage, please do that. Just go get a glass of water, a cup of tea, and just allow yourself some space and time. Hopefully there'll be lots of constructive things that you can take away from today, but I can't see you, you can see me. I don't know who's here, and I have to rely on you to take responsibility for you today. So thank you for that, and for taking the time and opportunity to listen. Can I say to you at the end of today, if there's anything that you would like to follow up with me, please do that. I'll give my email address and details at the end, or you can find me on Facebook or Google. I'm happy to talk to you and give you any information that you want from today. So as I said at the start, I have a massive interest in issues of post-adoption depression and a real passion for ensuring that new parents are aware that it's okay not to be okay. And you're going to hear that term a few times today. It is okay not to be okay. And if there's anyone here from Northern Ireland, they've maybe been to some of my trainings already. And if not, you know, I am out there pushing this subject because I think that it's so, so important for social workers and prospective parents and new parents to be aware that it is okay not to be okay. That as new parents, you're no different from any other parent out there. You've still got those feelings to come to terms with and deal with. So educating social workers and other professionals is something else that I spend a lot of time doing. So today in this webinar, I'd like us to focus on what post-adoption depression is, and to look at what post-adoption blues are as well. To look at the emotional impact of having a child placed for adoption. And some of you are maybe already there, some are maybe anticipating what that might feel like. So we'll talk about that. What to look out for, how might you be feeling, and to recognise those feelings if you do come across them. Then how to seek help and advice, especially in those early days of placement. And a lot of people are afraid to, because they think that they'll be seen as a failure, or the child will be removed, or they'll be judged in some way. So it's really, really important to talk about it in those early days as well as later on. And then to look at the end at what help and support is available for you as new or already parents. So please don't switch off. Hopefully you will get something that you can take away from today, and that it won't be Sometimes when I talk about post-adoption depression, people think it's going to be all gloom and doom, but it shouldn't be. And by the end of today, I hope you'll be feeling quite upbeat. And also, I'll give you an opportunity at the end to develop a care plan for you. We talk a lot about care plans for children, don't we? So to talk about a care plan for you that you can work on and focus on. So what is post-adoption depression? At one stage, I thought it would be a good idea to Google post-adoption depression and see what images came up. And there were lots out there, but these are some that I've chosen that I thought might be good to share with you today. You can see in some of these images, two parents not coping. You can see some where one is coping, the other's not. One where somebody feels that there's someone with a key in their back controlling them, people feeling lost, lonely. And someone who's very happy. Are they happy on the inside as well? We don't know, but I just thought I would share some of those images with you. And you probably have your own image, and it might be interesting at the end to talk about some of those images of post-adoption depression. So what is post-adoption depression? We're all very familiar, I'm sure, with postnatal depression, as it's an issue that's now widely accepted within our society. So why not post-adoption depression? When I started to do my research, different friends and colleagues, non-social work colleagues, I might add, asked me what I was going to focus on. And when I said post-adoption depression, they were quite shocked, really. And even now, if people ask me what I'm working on and I tell them post-adoption depression, they don't get it, really. I get comments like, but they wanted those children. But surely the birth parents did too, or how would they feel like that? So we're going to look at some of those issues today. Working as a social worker, I came across situations where I could see that a new parent's mood was deteriorating after the child arrived into the family. Things weren't as they predicted they might be, and asking for help became different, maybe difficult, even maybe impossible. And sometimes people do find it really difficult to admit to how they're feeling, find it hard to say to their social worker, even to their partner if they have one, or to family member that they're not coping, that it's just not, they're just not getting there. It's not feeling right. And it's so, so important that we do talk to our family, talk to our social worker about those feelings. This is a subject that a lot of people shy away from, and it's only in recent years that it has been included in training or during the home study. And I suppose I'd be interested to know if it was a subject that you had included in your training or in your home study, or hopefully in both. But I know that it's only recently here in Northern Ireland that has, and when I say recently, a few years ago, that has come to the fore. So I feel it's something we need to feel comfortable about from the start and openly talk about from the earliest days in the process. And if we think about postnatal depression, people will know about that. It's talked about, it's on TV, it's in dramas, it's very widely known. And why not the same for post-adoption depression? So looking back, I can identify with those early days and the uncertainty I felt, overwhelmed at times with responsibility and newness of parenthood, starting with almost 5-month-old. And no time I had 14 days to prepare from I first heard about the baby until he arrived. And it was such a shock to the system. Prior to that, I was working in the fostering and adoption team, and a memo had come into the office to say that there wouldn't be any babies placed for adoption. And at that stage, it wasn't children from the care system, it was consented babies. So I'd gone off and bought myself a new car and thought, this isn't going to happen. And then suddenly everything changed. So there was a huge, huge mind shift for me. And I could see that with people I was working with too. The suddenness of being approached about a child and just the adaptation that had to happen. So most people who've adopted feel quite different from their friends who've given birth, and often feel left out when they're with a group of friends. When a child is placed, life can change very quickly, from having no children at home to suddenly caring for a child or children. You think you're prepared, but are you really ready for this new role? You're probably not starting at birth. Maybe the child is months or even years old, a little personality already. What will it be like for you as individuals, as a couple, and now as a family? And these are all questions that you probably have asked already. It's fair to say that the transition to adoptive parenthood can present its unique challenges. Most new parents start at conception and plan for their child during pregnancy, having 9 months to mentally, physically, and emotionally adjust. But with adoption, this is not the case. Following the home study, training, and panel decision, you may wait weeks, months, or even years for that phone call or email from your social worker. Then there are a lot of decisions to make in a short space of time. Social workers to talk to, maybe pediatricians, health professionals, schools or nurseries to consult with, profiles and reports to read, and then photos and videos to watch before finally making your decision based on the knowledge you have gained on your child. You may be in work and have to arrange adoption leave or time off for introductions at short notice. Rearrange your home, set up a bedroom, shop for clothes, toys, food. All of this is very exciting and at the same time demanding of your emotions. You've waited for this moment and now you're going to be a parent. We know that some children are placed on a fostering with a view to adoption basis, concurrent or dual approved, and in England the situation is very different in Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland. So each of us within the different jurisdictions have different terms and children are placed at different stages. So you will know where you live and what the appropriate terms are for you. Adjusting to these terms can be difficult and sometimes you're afraid to ask for clarification, and that can sometimes make you feel a bit inadequate. There may be a lot of uncertainty around whether or not the child will stay with you and if the adoption will finally take place. There may be times when you feel afraid to attach to the child, not really knowing if you can become the parent. What do you tell friends and neighbours? How do you introduce the child? How much can you share? All of this can make you feel strange inside. You may not even be able to identify the problem or name how you feel. Being on that roller coaster of finding out about the child and meeting them can be exciting, demanding, tiring, even scary at times. And in preparing for this webinar, the title, Parenting in the Fast Lane, came about a few months ago when I was writing a new workshop and I was talking to a new parent about how they felt. And as we talked, the whole sort of analogy of the motorway came up, and it was like sitting in the hard shoulder waiting to join the motorway or the filter lane, and then getting out into the outside lane and not knowing when you can get into the ordinary speed lane, the inside lane again. And that's what, as we talked, it emerged that that's what the post-adoption period felt like, so, or the post-placement period. So that's where the title came from, and the person thankfully gave me permission to share that. Sometimes admitting that there's a problem is too difficult, or you're afraid to tell your social worker or anyone else that you're struggling. You may feel that you have no right to feel like this. After all, you've waited so long to be a parent. What might they think? Jane Bond, writing in 1995, summed it up like this. Suddenly, 3 or 4 weeks later, a strange sense of anxiety comes over you. Some describe the feeling as panic. Some say it's a gross feeling of inadequacy for the total responsibility for this little person. Others describe it as a cloudy blue feeling, while others go so far as to call it depression. What I call it is post-adoption depression syndrome. So that was 1995, which is only 25 years ago. And that's the first time that there'd been a name put onto this feeling, post-adoption depression syndrome. PADS. I don't really like PADS, but it conjures up other things. But maybe that's something that we can work on to change. But it's there and it's good, and it's given us something to hold on to and work with. Now that most children are placed from the care system and not babies who've been consented for adoption, I believe this feeling can come at any stage from introductions to years later on. It is estimated that between 10 to 32% of parents will suffer from some form of post-adoption depression. This could range from the blues, lasting for a few days, to psychosis at the other end of the spectrum. And thankfully, not many people suffer from psychosis, but some do. Most people are somewhere from the post-adoption blues to somewhere in the middle. And there's not really a lot written about this. Some studies have been done, but mostly in Australia or the States. So it's certainly an area that needs further research. Some people need to seek professional help. Some people can work through it themselves. Others need to speak to their GP or a counsellor or their social worker, and some need to go on to speak to their GP and be prescribed antidepressants. And can I say again that it is okay not to be okay, and give yourself permission to feel what's going on inside you today. Sometimes it's hard to know when to even start to feel like a parent, depending on the status the child has when they come into your family. And that can be difficult too, knowing how to feel like a parent or when to feel like a parent. So let's move on and look at the emotional impact of having a child placed for adoption. Becoming a family is probably something you've dreamed of for a long time. You might have made a plan in your head of how it will go and what it would be like, but the reality may be totally different. You may still have contact with birth family, a constant reminder that the child has another family and a former life. You may also remain in contact with the foster carers, and trying to balance all these different families can take its toll. Demands from social workers, schools, or other professionals can all drain you and create havoc with your emotions. When I do workshop with prospective parents, we usually do an interactive exercise where we look at emotions associated with postnatal depression and then relate these to post-adoption depression. So as we can't do this today, I'm just going to mention some of the feelings that might emerge. Feelings of tiredness, anxiety, fear, isolation, loneliness, sadness, low mood, loss of interest in self, home, or others, lack of energy, loss of appetite or overeating, hopelessness, darkness, loss of identity. Others may be added to the list, and it quickly shows the group that having a child placed for adoption can evoke similar feelings to postnatal depression. Then we add in contact, working with professionals, not feeling like a parent, and realise that post-adoption depression can be real. So why do new parents develop post-adoption depression? Let's take a few minutes just to explore some of the signs and symptoms of post-adoption depression, what you might look out for. If there is a genetic predisposition to depression or a history of depression in the family, please be aware of that. And that will probably come to the surface during the home study when you talk about health, but be aware of that. The child's behaviour may be more difficult than expected. You probably have an idea in your head of what your child will be like, and maybe even from reading profiles and talking to social worker and foster carer, you have an idea, and then it's maybe very different to that. Lack of attachment, and I'm sure you've had lots of training in attachment and maybe even have had some issues to deal with yourself, but that whole area of attachment and not feeling that if there are two of you that you're in the same place at the same time can cause difficulty and lead to depression. Too many expectations on how the post-placement time will proceed. Maybe you think it'll all happen very quickly, the child will settle in, and it'll all be okay. Exhaustion from time, energy spent in pre-placement visits. Having been through that with lots of people recently or in recent years, and just seeing the tiredness, and at the end of the introductions, people need to just lie down and have a sleep, and yet they're home with this new person, this new little person who needs so much care and attention. General exhaustion from bringing a child into your home and not enough support in place. And if you think back to your assessment days and doing that eco map and all the supports that you thought would be in place, and maybe things have changed from those days or people just aren't around, and then being encouraged not to bring a lot of people into your house in the early days to allow the child to attach, that can cause exhaustion and tiredness for you. Too many roles to take on, especially if it's an older child, and not only are you the parent, but maybe you're having to help the child in school or advocate for health issues or other forms of support for them. Difficulty adjusting to the fishbowl lifestyle. A lot of people are private people and aren't used to having others in their house. So just getting used to having your social worker, the child's social worker, maybe health visitor, and maybe a psychologist, other people coming in. And also getting used to the jargon, that can be quite difficult. And I just noticed last week on the Adoption UK website that someone has written a booklet called Jargon Buster. So you might want to get the hold of that. That might be useful. Sometimes people back off when you need them post-adoption. Maybe you've shared something and maybe a child who had a history of abuse, and you're just making people aware of how they need to be careful. Or maybe they've moved away, they've moved on, their children are a different age. No time to develop a new support network. Maybe you dreamed of going to mother and toddlers groups or parent groups, and suddenly there's contact to be taken care of, or there are lots of visits, and you just don't have the time to develop those new networks. Can I say if there are any relationship issues prior to placement, they will erupt. So be careful and address those issues on your journey. Karen Foley and John Thompson have written that book, The Post-Adoption Blues, and I refer to it as the Bible for adoptive parents. So if you haven't got it, I would suggest that after we go off this today, you go onto Amazon and order yourself a copy. This book covers almost every issue you can think of in terms of post-adoption period, and just helps us to look at if there's something you're worrying about and you look in the index, I have no doubt it'll be there. It's such a useful book. But 4 things that they identify in terms of expectations, I think are really useful to think about. And that is the expectations we have of ourselves. We are not going to be super mums and super dads. You know, you are yourself, you've got your own capabilities and expertise that you will bring to the situation, and you don't have to be super mum or super dad. So please examine your expectations of yourselves. Our expectations of family and friends, sometimes we really think that they will do a lot more than they are able to do or free to do. So sometimes to re-examine those can help. Maybe the expectations of the birth parents, that they will come up with the goods at contact, that they will appear, that they will be what the child needs, that they will answer the questions, that they'll provide the photographs and information that you need to help your child. And then expectations of others, including professionals and even those outside in society, to re-examine those and to look at what our expectations are as parents of those professionals and those people around us. Sometimes your expectations as a parent can be unrealistic and maybe set too high and unachievable. And that's probably more so of yourself than others. So to examine those and just to focus on those can be so important. Before we go on, can I just ask if there are any questions or any issues anybody wants to raise at this stage? I'd be happy to talk to Jo if she's there. Yeah.
Here I am. Yeah, Lynda, so far we haven't had any direct questions, just people mentioning the fact that during training, one of our members said that when time was short, unfortunately post-adoption depression was one of the topics they decided to jettison because they didn't have time to fit everything in. So it's like you said, it's something that's often seen on the sidelines. And then another member just commented on how important it is to have your support network and all the agencies that can provide you with any support. Just, go for it.
And I think that's interesting about the that issue being left off. I was doing training with a group of counsellors 2 or 3 years ago, and I wasn't hosting the training. I was there. It was part of a training day for counsellors who were going to work with adoption issues, and I was disappointed that the same thing happened. One slide was put up, 10 seconds was spent on it, and they went on to the next issue. And I know too from some of the clients who come to see me that they're disappointed too that that hasn't happened. So yeah, I think, you know, continuing to raise the profile is good, and encouraging people to ask lots of questions about it is
Yeah,
good.
and not just pay lip service to it during training, I guess.
Yeah.
I have just had a couple of questions popping in. Yeah, this is a good one. Do you find one of the biggest barriers that parents have that stops them from asking for help is fear of the child being removed?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, very much so. And in the last few years, I did work with someone where that happened, and it was really difficult. It was extremely difficult to pick up the pieces. Now, I obviously can't talk about that today because of confidentiality, but I've also dealt with lots of situations over the last few years where there have been difficulties even in the early days when the child arrived in placement. And I suppose some of the placement word is not one that sits comfortably with a lot of people now, so excuse me for using that, but we haven't got another one yet. But I've worked with, in the last few years, I've worked with some people who have basically had their children maybe weeks and have been struggling greatly. And the social worker, who's very forward thinking, has said, you need to go and speak to somebody, and they've been referred for counselling. And I must say, just giving them time and space to open up, to deal with their fears and to move on, has allowed that situation to progress. And probably some of those have now moved to the stage of adoption orders, and others are in the process. So and also some parents have gone on antidepressants, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, lots of new parents, and when we talk about birth parents who have postnatal depression, I mean, those will be screened. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in all of this too. There's no screening. When somebody goes into hospital to have a baby, the midwives screen for depression, and they will use the Edinburgh scale questionnaire to check, and especially if there's any history. We've just been talking about the predispositions to depression. If there's any history there, that situation will be screened, and the parent then will be followed up by the health visitor, and then, or the midwife, and then the health visitor in the community. But that was one of the things that came out of my research, was that there's no screening. And I know when I talked to a group of social workers about that, they felt that it wasn't their role, and they're probably right, because they're not medically trained. So it's maybe something to pick up with health visitors.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, another member's asked, are there differences in post-adoption depression between groups, i.e. are women or men more likely, LGBT, straight, singles, couples, anyone that you found more likely to suffer from post-adoption depression?
I think we probably hear more about the mums, but I have dealt with straight people, gay people, mums and dads, and probably one of the worst situations I've seen was a dad who was diagnosed with depression by GP and probably had post-adoption depression, but do GPs know about it? So I don't think so. I think we hear more about the mums, and probably more mums come forward, but no, I don't know. I can't answer that as far as research is concerned, but from my experience, I see it right across the board.
Okay,
so,
interesting.
Yeah.
And just one more, saying thank you for mentioning marital issues, because like you said, if there are cracks, then the arrival of a little person is going to accentuate that.
Yeah.
And that divorce happens in birth families, adopted families, it happens everywhere, but sometimes it's quite difficult to see, find support for those sort of situations. So
yeah. And sometimes too, when a placement gets into difficulty and those marital or relationship issues come to the surface, you can see that one parent was leading, that there was one who was really the applicant and the other went along with it, and weren't fully on board. Or that there were issues in the past, maybe, there were issues that they hadn't talked about. And I mean, sometimes issues are deleted from assessments before they go to panel. Can I say that? So I probably shouldn't. I'll be struck off for that. But I think too, sometimes things are played down a little, and those are things that need to be brought to the surface. And there are times when social workers will refer people for counselling during the assessment. And I've had that in the last few years where a social worker's contacted me and said, will you see this person because there's something going on here and I think they need to explore it a bit further. And they've asked me to do an assessment there. And sometimes people have had maybe 6 or 8 sessions. Sometimes it's just one. And I felt that, yes, they have dealt with that situation. So it's okay to stop the assessment and have some counselling and go back. I think nowadays counselling is seen as positive.
Yes,
And it's certainly becoming more positive. And, you know, it's not, there's still some stigma around, but certainly not like it used to be. And it's, I would say probably most social workers now are very aware of the need for counselling and will refer people at any stage, as I say, from the very early days right through to people with teenagers.
Yeah.
I think too, some social workers aren't really aware of the issue of post-adoption depression, although I think now it's probably wider known. But I did some training about 3 years ago, maybe, with a group of social workers. I do it quite regularly, but at this one training, someone wrote on the evaluation form, I've been doing this job for 20 years and it's the first time this subject has been addressed. So
scary, yeah.
Scary, isn't it? Yeah, but I think now people are much more aware of it and will look out for it and encourage people to go for help. Some people go privately for help, you know, see a counsellor privately. Others, their social worker will refer them. So
there's always help out there.
Yeah, and it's really important to get it, isn't it?
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely, because things won't improve if you've got a small one running around the house. They won't be a magic solution, will they?
No, absolutely not. It'll just get worse and worse. And then it's so sad. I always find it really sad when I get parents of teenagers coming in who are so tired and so low and have lost interest in themselves as well. And yet if they'd sought help years ago, and they'd have been afraid to, 10 years ago, they'd have been afraid to ask for help because they'd have this huge fear of being seen as a failure or the child removed. Yes. But if they'd asked for help, things could be very different.
Yeah. And the conversation around mental health is just so much more inclusive now, isn't it, than maybe 2 years, 5 years ago, you know, never mind 10 years ago. So
yeah, absolutely.
Moving slowly in the right direction.
In the adoption world, we're becoming so much more aware of post-adoption depression and post-adoption blues. I mean, not everyone's going to be diagnosed with depression. I don't know if anyone has actually been diagnosed with post-adoption depression, because none of the people I've worked with have been. It's been depression. Excuse me. So maybe some training for GPs is necessary there too.
Yeah, put it on the list. Okay, thanks so much. So I'll pop back in a little while with some more questions, if that's okay with you.
Yes, okay, we'll continue. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Lynda.
Thank you. So hopefully my slides will still work here. Yeah. Excuse me. I'm just trying to find where I'm at here. Hope I haven't lost my place. So I'd like to remind you at this stage that adoption is not straightforward. It's not like your friends who've brought their babies home from hospital and they've continued on with life. Adoption is just not like that. It is very different. Remember, you've spent a long time getting to this point of having a child. You've maybe, and I know some people do put adoption as their first choice when it comes to creating a family and forming a family. But for a lot of people, it's not. And it's been, you know, trying to have children naturally, then maybe fertility treatment or investigations, then maybe treatment, and that can take years and years. So it's been a long time probably getting to this point. Sometimes people out there think it's the easy option, not being pregnant, but they forget about the adjustment that the 9 months allows in terms of physical, emotional, and mental preparation. Adoption is usually not something you spend your life preparing for. It's interesting that some people who come for counselling say, but I always thought I'd adopt. There was something at the back of my mind that made me think I would, or some people choose to. I've seen some people who have chosen not to have children, that, or maybe a gay couple who've decided that they don't want to go down alternative routes, but adoption is their first choice. But for a lot of people, it's not. They've played with dolls as a child and talked about being a mummy or a daddy. So that's something they've maybe thought they would be when they grow up and they would have a child that way. So adoption is sometimes something that needs to be adjusted towards, and the mindset needs to change. You may feel sad on what you predicted to be the happiest day of your life. You've worked hard for this, you've got through the home study, you've done all the training, you've been to endless seminars, webinars, training days, and you've read the reports, you've met the child, you've done the introductions, and what you thought would be the happiest day of your life isn't. And that can really pull you down. You will be tired, as we said earlier. You'll be tired during introductions, at the end of introductions, in those early days, trying to adjust to a child who's maybe looking to go back to foster carers, or tells you your orange juice isn't as nice as theirs, or whatever it is, and that can be really difficult. Remember that fertility issues can come to the fore at any stage in the process, especially after the placement of a child. This is a grief that will be revisited, at no doubt, at many stages in your life. And often social workers, when they're coming to panel, will be asked, has the fertility issue been dealt with? And my view is that it's like any other grief in life that you've worked through. If you've lost a loved one, you grieve at the time, you grieve later, but there are triggers that set things off for you. And fertility is like that too. Maybe a friend has a baby, or you watch something on TV, and that can trigger off those fertility issues for you. So just be aware that those can come to the surface at any stage, and it's how you deal with those. In the last couple of years, I've become very aware of the whole menopause issue, not just because I've been going through it myself, but parents that I've been working with young children who have gone through all these stages to get to adoption, and realise that now they're menopausal and they've got a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old in the house. So that can be difficult physically, mentally and emotionally, that whole menopausal stage. It can also trigger the loss again, because as you realise, you're not going to be able to get pregnant and all those bits of your body are shutting down. And that sounds pretty graphic, but isn't that what's happening? And then you've got a house with hormonal teenagers and mothers, and that can be really, really difficult time for people. So just look out for that. When a child is placed, usually one parent will take the adoption leave if there are two at home. And it's usually, if it's a mum and dad, usually the mum will take the adoption leave, although I know that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a dad, or two mums or two dads, and one will go back to work sooner than the other. That person can feel very left out. They can feel that they're not part of what's going on during the day. They're not part of social work visits. They're not included in discussions. And I've spoken to some social workers about this and encouraged them to even link in with that second partner, maybe meet them for lunch or have a coffee with them in their lunch break, to make sure to contact them, have a phone call at least, or visit later in the day at some stage, just to keep checking in with them. But they can feel left out, and it's really important, if you are that person, that you explain that to your partner and also talk to somebody about that. And those are just some of the issues that can raise their head when it comes to adoption. So remember, adoption is not straightforward. As well, for the child continuing having contact with birth parents. That's a big issue in Northern Ireland. I'm not sure what it's like in England now. I used to have a lot of contact when I worked in my previous job, but I'm not across the water as much now. But continued contact with birth parents during when the child is placed, and then even after the adoption order here, face-to-face contact would be quite the norm. As I said earlier, and I said again on purpose, infertility is an issue that does need to be kept on the surface, and that you become aware of. Remember, you're choosing to love a stranger. This child is not related to you by birth. You may not look like each other. That might be a huge issue for you. And the issue of smell has come up several times in counselling sessions, where a person has said, I just don't like their smell. I can't get used to their smell. And it's not about being dirty or having BO or anything like that. It's we all have a smell. I'm sure we're aware of that. But even after a bath or whatever, it's just they haven't been able to attach because of the smell. So be very aware of that. And similarly for children, smells are so important. The child may not live up to your expectations. You've had this dream of what you will be doing with your child, where you'll be going, what they'll be like as they grow up. And maybe you have to change your expectations. It could be a lengthy court process. That's quite common here as well. A child is placed and you're told we're going to court next month, and then something changes in the care plan, and that has to be all evaluated, and you're sitting maybe 2 years later still waiting to go to court, and that can take its toll on you. And then therapeutic parenting, we're all very aware of, is something that is different from how your friends parent. So that's another issue to be taken on board. And then continued contact with social services or a voluntary agency, wherever your child has been placed from. So it's not like in the old days when you got the adoption order and you left the court steps saying goodbye to the guardian ad litem or CAFCAS worker in your case in England and went off on your merry way. It's now continued contact, which of course can be very positive as well if you've got good post-adoption support. So what do we do with all of this information? Can I just encourage you to ask for help? And I said before, it's okay not to be okay. And I'm going to say it again. It is okay not to be okay. It is okay to ask for help. And can I encourage you to ask for help? What can you do for you? First thing I think you need to do is to be honest with yourself. To just sit down, have a cup of tea, coffee, whatever it is, and be honest with yourself. Think about how you are feeling. Ask yourself that question. How am I? What's going on for me? Keep a journal. Write down, and people will say, but I'm too busy to do that. Even 3 words a day. Write down how you're feeling. You know, today feeling sad, gloomy, reflective, anxious. The next day it mightn't just be the same 3 words, but it allows you to see if there's a pattern developing here. What's going on? Are there certain days that things are worse than others? Are there certain patterns that occur? If there's a partner, be open with them, share with each other, tell someone, tell your friend, tell a family member, talk to somebody, talk to your social worker. And if you find that difficult, you know, maybe there's the child's social worker, maybe there's someone else you can talk to, but try and take that step and tell them. If there's a child who's still got health visiting input, maybe talk to the health visitor. They can be useful as well. I put go to a support group with question mark because some people are naturally group people, other people are not. And if you ask someone if they'd like to go to a group and they're not a group person, it doesn't work. So if you're a group person, look to a support group. If you're not, that's okay. You don't have to. We can leave that one out. I would suggest going for counselling. Of course I would. I've seen how that has changed people's attitude. It's changed their lives. Remember, it is so good to talk. And counselling allows you a confidential space outside of social services. Counsellor doesn't, it's not a statutory service. Reports aren't written back. Of course, there's always a confidentiality clause that if anything is shared, that needs to be passed on, but you will know that. But it's a space for you, a private space, a confidential space to talk about how you feel. Seek out good support with someone who understands adoption issues. People will often say to me, I went for a coffee with my friend, but they didn't get it. And while they're really good and supportive, they will say, but their child's the same age and they're going through those issues, but they're not the same. So while it's good to have those supports, make sure that you do have somebody in your network who understands adoption issues. And now most agencies will include family members in training or when a child is being placed. So avail of those days where you can bring your family members along to be educated. Take time out to relax. And people will often say, but I don't have time to relax. But you have to make it. It's like you take time for other things in your life. Take 20 minutes to have a bath, to sit down and listen to some mindfulness CD or download from YouTube. And have time for you, even if it's only 10 minutes a day. Have time for yourself. And if you are a couple, it's really important to connect with each other. When the children go to bed, make a cup of tea and sit down, switch the TV off and talk for 10 minutes. and then put the TV on and relax, or whatever, music, whatever. But it's really, really vitally important to have that time. And getting regular exercise, we all know of the huge connection between mental health and physical health. If you have a child in a buggy, that's easy, isn't it? You can put them in it and take them to the park or go for a walk. But even when the child goes to bed, if there are two of you, you can take it in turns or find space in the day to get a regular bit of exercise. Please remember, it is okay to ask for help. It's okay not to be okay. And I know I've said that several times, but it is so important to give yourself permission not to be okay. Remember, you're not alone. You're not on this journey on your own. There are people there who will be willing to help. And remember that bonding with your child may take time. Don't expect it to be an instant click. It might be for one person, but it's not for everybody. So remember that bonding does take time. Get enough exercise, get enough rest. Please examine your expectations. Seek help for yourself for the benefit of your child and your family. It's so important to get that help. So remember, exercise and walk every day, time out to relax, seek good support, have time as a couple. Please switch off your phone and social media. Often I work with couples from their 20s right through to their 50s. And when we start to talk about life at home, it's often she's on her phone on WhatsApp, talking to her friends or checking out Facebook or Instagram, and he's on looking at social football or social media, or they're both involved in WhatsApp groups. And while they're talking to other people, they're not talking to each other. So please take time to switch the phone off. And as I've said earlier, go for counselling. Please remember, it is good to talk. Just finally, can I suggest that when we go off this webinar today, that you just take a few minutes to write down how you could care for you. When I do a workshop with new parents, I would give them a nice fancy piece of paper and ask them to write down some things that they would take away from what we've talked about today. So I would suggest you do that, or on your phone, on the notebook on your phone. And if you can't do it now, maybe do it later on this evening, or when the children are busy, if they're with you today. But just take time to write down what you can do to take care of you. What can you put in place? Or if there's not a child placed with you now, maybe do that and then put it in an envelope. And then when they are placed, look back on it. And that's a challenge that I often set for people. So can I just thank you for being here today, for listening? And can I recommend again that you do buy Foley and Thompson's book? If you can see it here, it's probably back to front, but it is such a useful tool to have. Adoption UK have a fact sheet called Post-Adoption Depression. You'll find some articles on the internet, some chapters in books, but I think that Foley and Thompson one is the only full book that's written about post-adoption depression. Feel free to contact me, as I said earlier. You'll find me on Facebook, Lynda Graham Counselling, and I've also a page called Post-Adoption Support and Counselling. I'm happy to answer questions at any stage. So thank you so much for being here today. And if there are any questions, we can take those now.
Thank you so much, Lynda. Thank you. Just on behalf of everyone for all your time and your expertise. That was really, really useful. Thank you so much. I love the idea of putting it in an envelope. That's a really good one.
That's the challenge I do with the perspective.
Absolutely.
The prospective parents, I give them this lovely designed page and ask them to fill it in, put it in an envelope, and then when the child is placed, I'm sure they don't remember, but I suggest they put it in with all their other bits and pieces. So yeah, good idea.
Yeah, very much so. Just a couple more questions have come through since we spoke last. So someone worried about their eco map, worrying it's not large enough. I'm worrying they don't have like what looks like an army of supporters around them. Should that be a concern to them going forward?
I don't think it's a concern at all. Actually, if I was a social worker doing the assessment, I'd probably think that that was more honest. And it's better to have 2 or 3 really good supports. Sometimes people have maybe 10, 20 supports in there, and then when it comes to the bit, there's maybe only 1 or 2 of those who are really able to support. So, I mean, I wouldn't find that for me, it wouldn't be an issue. I don't know if that has been an issue for your social worker, has it?
Well, I would agree. I would say it's quality, not quantity, and it's the type of people
Absolutely.
you can message at 3 a.m. saying, you know,
Yeah.
they've got a temperature, what should I do?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, very much so.
And I think you've touched on this already, but do you find that post-adoption depression is something that kicks in early days when children first come home, or further down the line? I think you probably touched on this already.
I think at any stage, I've seen people over the last few years who have been diagnosed with depression in the very early days, right through to 10, 14 years later after a child has arrived. And I think if it's not dealt with in the early days, it can certainly linger. And when you talk to those people who come to you 10 years later, you realize that there's been a little bit of it there all the way through. And it's something they haven't dealt with in the early days. And 10 years ago, people would never have dreamt of feeling like this or saying they felt like that. Whereas now, I think if you've got a really good social worker, and I think of the people I've dealt with recently, where the social workers have contacted me and said, you know, this person has a child who's only been here a few days or weeks and they need to talk. Will you see them? And we start talking. That opens the space, it opens the doors. And sometimes the GP is brought on board as well, and together with counselling and antidepressants. Some don't need antidepressants. It's just being allowed to talk about how you feel. And you're starting with a ready-made personality. I mean, if you think of all your friends who've come home with a newborn, and I know some people here have recently had tiny babies placed with them, 1 or 2 days old, but they've had high levels of contact. But if you're starting with a 3 or 4-year-old who's a ready-made personality, who remembers everything from their foster home, who maybe wants to go back there, who complains that you know, your just doesn't taste right, your bubble bath isn't nice. You know, it's those tiny things that set it off. And you're doing and you've bought the same juice, but the water's different or the cup is different. And it's those tiny, tiny things that can often set it off for you. And, you know, most times people are coming out of work and they've been there for a long time and they suddenly have to leave a job on adoption leave, and life changes, doesn't it? Totally. There's no preparation psychologically for that. And it's stepping out of work. It's, you know, change, as we said earlier, all the things you have to do in a few weeks or maybe even days for some people. And then you're left with this child who's unappreciative. Not that you want children to be appreciative, but you do want them. You don't want them to complain about the juice, or maybe they don't sleep well and you need your sleep. That's one of the biggest issues, isn't it? And I know some people do it night about. You know, some people will sleep in a different room, and they will take it in turns to get up with a child or children during the night because it's the only way they can survive in those days. So it's just doing what's right for you. Some people have, you know, had to bring the child into their room or one of them go into the room. I suppose I would encourage you to get in touch with your post-adoption team if there is one, and you know, talk to, if you have a therapy expert there or a sleep expert. There are lots of resources out there and people to tap into as well, but don't contact them all at once. I think sometimes you can be flooded with information, you know, and sometimes people have a couple of social workers involved, excuse me, maybe they're a social worker and the child's social worker, and they're not both saying the same thing, and then it becomes confusing. So be careful not to bring too many people on board, but certainly seek the advice and support.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you again so much. And we can see your details there. And if it's all right with you, Lynda, I'll share the PowerPoint with our people who've registered for this webinar so they can.
Yes, that's great. No problem. Yeah. And if anybody wants anything else, you know, certainly get in touch. There's no problem.
The details are there. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks, Lynda, for your time and expertise.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.